Montana Territory, 1873. The endless skies stretched above the small settlement of Silver Creek like God's own canvas, painted in brilliant hues of orange and gold as the sun descended behind the jagged mountain peaks. Down in the valley, a solitary figure in black moved slowly through the cemetery gates, her slender shoulders squared with determination despite the weight of grief that bent her spine. Hannah Goodwin was 23 years old, with honey blonde hair tucked beneath a simple black bonnet and eyes the color of summer storms. She placed fresh wildflowers on the grave marker that had become too familiar over the past 18 months. The carved letters of Samuel Goodwin, beloved husband, had weathered slightly with the passing seasons, but the pain of his loss remained as sharp as the day the mining accident had taken him. Last visit for a while, Hannah whispered to the silent stone. The bank's taking the boarding house. There's nothing left for me here. Silver Creek had once held such promise when Hannah and Samuel arrived 3 years ago. The boarding house had been their dream, a place to build a life and perhaps someday fill with children. Now it represented only hollow rooms and mounting debts. Hannah had built walls around her heart since Samuel's death. The frontier is no place for a woman alone, she often told herself, and love is a luxury I can no longer afford. She had convinced herself that survival was enough, that the memory of one love would sustain her through a lifetime of solitude. As she walked back through town, the boardwalks creaked beneath her practical black boots. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, ignoring the pitying looks from townsfolk who had watched her struggle to maintain the boarding house after Samuel's death. Their whispers followed her. Poor young widow, too stubborn to remarry, destined to leave the only home she'd known as a married woman. The stage to Helena would depart in the morning. Her cousin had offered her a position in their millinery shop, not the life Hannah had imagined, but one that promised meals and shelter. She had packed her belongings into a single trunk, selling or giving away the furniture and mementos that wouldn't fit. The boarding house keys would be surrendered to the bank tomorrow. Hannah paused before the whitewashed building that had been her home and business. 18 rooms, a once bustling dining area, and a kitchen where she had learned to cook for a dozen hungry miners and travelers. All empty now. She squared her shoulders and stepped inside for one final night. Mrs. Goodwin? The voice startled her as she locked the front door behind her. A tall figure had emerged from the parlor, a young man Hannah recognized as one of the seasonal ranch hands who sometimes passed through town. She recalled him staying at the boarding house briefly the previous autumn, though they had exchanged few words. Mr. Quinn. Hannah's voice was cool with practiced distance. I'm afraid the boarding house is closed. I'm leaving tomorrow. I know, ma'am. Colton Quinn removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and clear blue eyes that held a steady, earnest gaze. That's why I came. Heard in town you were selling off the last of your furniture. I need a bed frame and wondered if you still had one available. At 25, Colton had the weathered hands of a working cowboy, but a face that still held youthful openness beneath a light stubble. His shoulders were broad beneath a simple cotton shirt, his frame lean but strong from years in the saddle. There's one left upstairs. Third door on the right. Hannah gestured toward the staircase. $10 if you want it. That's more than fair. He nodded, then hesitated. Would you mind if I looked at it first? I can pay you now regardless. Something about his respectful manner softened Hannah's usual guardedness. Of course. I'll show you. As they climbed the stairs, Hannah noticed how Colton maintained a proper distance, his footsteps deliberately slow behind her. The third room had once been their most requested accommodation, with views of the mountains and morning sunlight streaming through the window. It's a good bed, Hannah said, running her hand across the carved wooden headboard. Samuel built it himself when we first opened. Colton approached and examined the craftsmanship with appreciative eyes. Your husband had skilled hands. This is quality work. He was a carpenter before the mining fever took hold. The words emerged before Hannah could stop them. She rarely spoke of Samuel to strangers. Where will you go? Colton asked, his voice quiet in the empty room. Helena. My cousin owns a hat shop. Hannah straightened her shoulders. I've imposed on Silver Creek's charity long enough. Colton frowned. Charity isn't the word I'd use for a woman who's kept a business running alone for over a year. Hannah felt a flush of unexpected warmth at his words. Nevertheless, my time here is done. As they descended the stairs, a tremendous crash of thunder split the air. Rain began lashing against the windows with sudden fury, the sky darkening as if night had arrived hours early. "That's a cloudburst if I ever saw one," Colton remarked, peering through the glass. "The road to my camp will be washed out within minutes." Hannah hesitated, her ingrained hospitality warring with her determination to maintain distance. "I suppose you'll need a room for the night, Mr. Quinn. Since you're buying the bed anyway, you might as well use it one last time." "I'd be much obliged, Mrs. Goodwin. I can pay extra for the trouble." "That won't be necessary." Hannah turned toward the kitchen. "I have some stew left. Not much, but you're welcome to share it." The storm intensified as evening fell, lightning illuminating the emptied rooms in brief, ghostly flashes. Hannah and Colton sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table, the sounds of their spoons against bowls nearly drowned by the drumming rain. "This stage to Helena," Colton said, breaking the silence. "Will it run if the roads are washed out?" Hannah set down her spoon. She hadn't considered this complication. I don't know. I need to be on that stage." "The Wilkins Ranch needs a cook," Colton said carefully. "Mr. Wilkins mentioned it yesterday when I was picking up supplies in town. His wife's expecting their 4th child, and she can't manage the house and the ranch hands anymore. I'm leaving Silver Creek, Mr. Quinn." Hannah's voice was firm. "Of course." He nodded respectfully. "Just thought I'd mention it. The position comes with a cabin of your own. Private-like." Hannah stared into her stew, suddenly seeing her future in Helena. Living in her cousin's spare room, enduring pitying introductions to suitable widowers and bachelors, sleeping each night to the sounds of a family not her own. Independence had been her goal, yet Helena offered only a different kind of dependency. "I'll consider it," she finally said, surprising herself. "If the stage can't run tomorrow." The storm continued through the night, and with first light came confirmation from the stage office. The road east was impassable. 3 days, minimum, before travel would resume. Hannah stood in the bank president's office that morning, her trunk still packed in the empty boarding house. "Mr. Barton, I need 3 more days. The stage can't run." The balding banker adjusted his spectacles. "Mrs. Goodwin, our arrangement was clear. The keys today, or foreclosure proceedings begin." "I've sold everything to pay what I could," Hannah protested. "Surely 3 days. The bank has been more than patient. A business requires a man's steady hand, Mrs. Goodwin. Your situation is unfortunate, but I'll cover the 3 days." Hannah turned to find Colton Quinn standing in the doorway, hat in hand, but spine straight with purpose. "Mr. Quinn, this is a private matter," the banker began. "How much for 3 days extension?" Colton asked, removing bills from his pocket. "That's not necessary," Hannah objected, pride flaring. Colton's eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "Consider it advance payment for cooking at the Wilkins Ranch. If you decide to take the position." The banker calculated quickly. $20 would secure the extension. Colton placed the money on the desk without hesitation. "Mrs. Goodwin will surrender the keys in 3 days, or I'll handle the matter personally." Outside the bank, Hannah's confusion battled with gratitude. "Why would you do that, Mr. Quinn? You hardly know me." "I know enough," he answered simply, "and I dislike seeing anyone backed into a corner." Hannah studied his face, searching for hidden motives, but finding only straightforward decency. "I'll repay you whether I take the position or not." "As you wish." He glanced at the sky, which had cleared to a brilliant blue. "I need to head back to the ranch and let them know about the bed frame. Would you consider riding out with me to speak with Mrs. Wilkins yourself? You could see the cabin." Hannah hesitated only briefly. "Let me change into something more suitable for riding." The Wilkins Ranch sprawled across a fertile valley 20 miles from Silver Creek. By the time they arrived, the afternoon sun had dried the muddy roads, and Hannah's spirits had lifted unexpectedly. Something about the open country, the smell of sage and pine, and Colton's quiet, respectful company had eased the tightness in her chest. Clara Wilkins was a practical woman with 3 energetic children and another visibly on the way. She welcomed Hannah with obvious relief. 7 ranch hands during the season, plus my husband and the foreman," she explained, showing Hannah the cookhouse. "Breakfast and dinner daily, lunch packed for the range. The cabin's just beyond those cottonwoods, 2 rooms and a porch. Nothing fancy, but private." The small cabin was simple but sound, with a stone fireplace and windows that caught the western light. Hannah ran her hand along the rough-hewn table, imagining herself there instead of in Helena. "I don't need an answer today," Clara said, noting Hannah's thoughtful expression. "But we need someone by next week." "I'll let you know before I leave," Hannah promised. As Colton drove her back to Silver Creek in the ranch wagon, Hannah found herself studying his profile against the setting sun. There was an easy competence to his movements, a thoughtfulness to his silence that didn't demand filling. "Why did you really help me this morning, Mr. Quinn?" she finally asked. He considered before answering. "My mother was widowed young. 5 children and a small farm in Kansas. Neighbors helped when they could, but—" he shrugged. "I know what it's like when the world expects you to just disappear or remarry, as if those are the only options." "What happened to her?" "Your mother. She kept that farm. Raised all 5 of us. Never remarried, though plenty tried courting her." His smile was warm with memory. "Stubbornest woman I ever knew. She sounds remarkable. She'd like you, I think." Hannah felt a flutter of something forgotten, connection, perhaps, or possibility. She pushed it firmly away. "I haven't decided about the position yet." "Of course." His tone held no pressure, only acceptance. The next morning, Hannah woke to pounding on the boarding house door. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and peered cautiously through the curtain before opening it. Colton stood on the porch, his expression urgent. "Mrs. Goodwin, I apologize for the early hour, but there's trouble." "What's happened?" "Travelers came through the ranch last night. They're saying the bank in Helena was robbed 2 days ago. The thieves shot 3 people, including the owner of a millinery shop." Hannah's hand flew to her mouth. "My cousin." "They didn't name names, but I thought you should know before making any decisions." A telegram to Helena confirmed her worst fears. Her cousin Sarah was among the wounded. The shop closed indefinitely. Her planned refuge was gone. "I'll take the Wilkins position," Hannah told Clara later that day. "At least temporarily." The following weeks established a new rhythm to Hannah's life. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, packed their midday meals, and had dinner waiting when they returned. The work was demanding but straightforward, and her cabin became a sanctuary of quiet after the busy cookhouse. Colton, she learned, was more than a seasonal hand. He served as the ranch's horse trainer, breaking and gentling the wild stock with a patience that contradicted the typical bronc-busting methods. Hannah often found herself pausing at the corral fence, watching his careful work with the horses, his voice low and steady, his movements deliberate rather than forceful. "You don't break them like the others do," she observed one evening as she brought water to the corral. Colton rested his arms on the fence beside her. "Breaking just means they're damaged, but useful. I'd rather build trust." "Does that actually work with wild things?" There was a note in her voice that suggested she wasn't only asking about horses. "Takes longer," he admitted, "but they're stronger for it in the end. More willing partners." Their conversations grew more frequent as summer progressed. Hannah found herself looking forward to the moments when Colton would appear at the cookhouse door, always with a small reason, a repair needed, a message delivered, a question about supplies. His quiet presence became a comfort rather than an intrusion. When the cook stove broke in August, it was Colton who spent an evening repairing it, working alongside Hannah as she prepared the next day's bread dough. "Samuel used to sing while he worked," Hannah said unexpectedly, watching Colton's hands as he adjusted the stove's damper. "Old church hymns, mostly." Colton glanced up, recognizing the significance of her sharing this memory. "My father whistled. Same 3 tunes, over and over until my mother threatened to stuff cotton in her ears." Hannah smiled, then caught herself, surprised by how naturally the expression had come. "I haven't thought of that in months." Samuel singing. "Remembering isn't betrayal," Colton said gently. "It's honoring." That night, alone in her cabin, Hannah realized she had spoken Samuel's name without the crushing weight of grief. The recognition startled her, followed quickly by guilt. Was she already forgetting? Moving forward felt like abandonment. Of Samuel, of their dreams, of the woman she had been with him. "I won't love again," she whispered to the empty room, reaffirming the walls around her heart. "I can't." September brought cattle buyers to the ranch, and with them, trouble. 3 rough men with hard eyes and expensive pistols arrived with the legitimate buyers, but showed more interest in the ranch's horses than its cattle. Hannah overheard them at dinner, their voices carrying from the bunkhouse table. That bay stallion would fetch a prime price in Wyoming. The trainer's always around. Be easier to wait until they move the herd north. We ain't waiting. Tonight, after everyone's asleep. Hannah hesitated only briefly before seeking out Colton, finding him in the stable. Horse thieves, she whispered, explaining what she'd heard. Colton's expression hardened. I'll tell Mr. Wilkins. We'll be ready. Be careful, Hannah said, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. I will. His hand briefly covered hers where it rested on the stall door. Thank you for the warning. That night, shots echoed across the ranch. Hannah rushed from her cabin to see lanterns moving near the corral, men shouting, horses neighing in distress. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and ran toward the commotion. The scene was chaos. Two of the thieves had mounted horses and were attempting to drive several others ahead of them toward the open range. Ranch hands pursued on foot, Mr. Wilkins among them. The third thief was exchanging gunfire from behind a water trough. Hannah searched frantically for Colton among the defenders. When she spotted him circling behind the corral, she realized his intent. He was trying to cut off the escaping horses. The move would place him directly in the line of fire from the hidden thief. Colton, behind the trough, she screamed, her voice carrying across the yard. The warning came just as the thief rose to aim at Colton's advancing figure. Colton dropped instantly, the bullet passing overhead. His return shot found its mark, and the thief fell with a cry. The attempted theft was thwarted, the remaining criminals apprehended by dawn. The ranch hands celebrated their success, but Hannah could only focus on how closely disaster had brushed them. When she finally found Colton sitting alone on the corral fence, the eastern sky lightening behind him, her hands were still trembling. You could have been killed, she said without preamble. But I wasn't. Thanks to you. His smile faded when he saw her expression. Hannah. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his voice broke something loose inside her. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't care about someone who might not come home. Not again. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Is that what you're afraid of? Losing someone else? I built a life once. Watched it crumble when Samuel died. I won't. I can't do that again. Colton's voice was gentle but firm. So you'd rather not build anything at all? Live half a life to avoid losing a whole one. Hannah turned away, unable to face the truth in his words. I should check on breakfast. For days afterward, Hannah maintained careful distance, retreating behind professional courtesy whenever Colton approached. If he was hurt by her withdrawal, he respected her choice enough not to press. The first October frost brought unexpected news. Mr. Wilkins called Hannah to the main house one evening, his expression unusually solemn. Mrs. Goodwin, I've received a letter from Silver Creek. He handed her an official-looking document. It seems there's been a development regarding your boarding house. Hannah scanned the legal language with growing confusion. I don't understand. The bank president was arrested for embezzlement. Several foreclosures are being reviewed, including yours. The new bank examiner believes your loan payments were misappropriated. Are they saying the boarding house might still be mine? Her voice caught on the possibility. There will be a hearing next month. But yes, with proper documentation of your payments, it's possible. Hannah sat heavily in a chair, the paper trembling in her fingers. I kept all the receipts. Every payment since Samuel died. Then I suggest you attend the hearing. Take a week's leave with pay. Sort this matter properly. The journey back to Silver Creek felt like traveling backwards in time. The town looked smaller somehow, the buildings more weathered than she remembered. Hannah checked into the hotel that had once been her competition and spent the day gathering her records and visiting the new bank examiner. Mrs. Barton has been most cooperative since her husband's arrest, the examiner explained. She's provided ledgers showing several accounts with irregularities, yours among them. Hope fluttered in Hannah's chest as she presented her carefully preserved receipts. These show I made every payment until the foreclosure. This appears to support your claim. The hearing is a formality at this point. That evening, Hannah walked to the cemetery, her steps lighter than they had been in months. Samuel's grave was well tended, someone having placed fresh flowers recently. The boarding house might be mine again, she told the silent stone. Our dream might continue. As darkness fell, Hannah found herself standing before the boarding house. The windows were dark, the paint peeling slightly, but it stood solid and waiting. On impulse, she tried her old key in the lock. To her surprise, it still worked. Inside, Dust covered the floors and staircase, but the bones of the building remained strong. Hannah moved through the empty rooms, remembering Samuel laughing as they painted the parlor. Their first guests gathered around the dining table, the pride they'd felt at creating something together. But other memories surfaced too. The crushing loneliness after his death, the struggle to maintain everything alone, the growing debts and dwindling occupancy. The boarding house represented both her happiest memories and her darkest hours. A knock at the front door startled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Colton Quinn stood on the porch, his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Wilkins said you'd return to town," he explained. "I was delivering horses to the livery and thought I'd see if you needed anything." Hannah hesitated only briefly before stepping back. "Would you come in? I could use a perspective other than my own." They walked through the house together, Colton examining the structure with a craftsman's eye while Hannah explained the situation with the bank. "It's a fine building," he said when they returned to the parlor. "Solid foundation, good bones. But is it still mine?" Hannah asked softly. "Even if legally it is, does it still belong to me in the ways that matter?" Colton considered her question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "What does your heart tell you?" "That this was Samuel's and my dream. That continuing it alone wasn't what either of us envisioned." She traced a finger through the dust on the mantelpiece. "That perhaps holding so tightly to the past has kept me from seeing any future at all." "And what future do you see now, Hannah?" His voice was quiet, careful not to lead her answer. She met his gaze directly. "I don't know yet. But for the first time in 18 months, I'm willing to look for one." The hearing was brief and decisive. With evidence of Mr. Barton's malfeasance clear, the boarding house was returned to Hannah's ownership, along with compensation for the furnishings she'd been forced to sell. Standing once more on the boarding house porch with the keys in her hand, Hannah made her decision. She found Colton at the livery, preparing to return to the ranch. "I won't be reopening the boarding house," she told him without preamble. Surprise flickered across his face. "You're selling it?" "Eventually. But first, I'm going to repair it properly, paint it, and make it attractive to buyers. I've hired 2 carpenters to start next week." She took a deep breath. "I'd like to return to my position at the Wilkins Ranch while I oversee the work here." Colton studied her face. "You're certain?" "The boarding house was our beginning, Samuel's and mine. But it doesn't have to be my ending." Hannah stepped closer to him. "There's a difference between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it. I'm beginning to understand that." They rode back to the ranch together, the autumn landscape brilliant with turning leaves. Hannah found herself sharing stories of Samuel more freely, not from grief now, but from a place of honoring what had been while acknowledging it was past. The winter brought heavy snows and long evenings. Hannah expanded her responsibilities at the ranch, helping Clara with her new baby and teaching the older children to read beside the fireplace. Colton began joining them for these evening lessons, his quiet presence becoming as familiar as the cabin walls themselves. On Christmas Eve, the ranch hands gathered in the main house for dinner and celebration. Hannah had spent days preparing special dishes, determined that these men so far from their families would have a proper holiday. When Colton presented her with a small carved horse, its lines capturing the grace of movement she'd admired in his training, Hannah felt something shift within her, as if a door long locked had finally opened. "Would you walk with me a moment?" she asked him quietly as the others began singing carols. Outside, stars pierced the velvet darkness with exceptional clarity. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air as they walked toward Hannah's cabin. "I've been thinking about what you said months ago," Hannah began. "About building trust rather than breaking spirits." Colton nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I've kept people at a distance since Samuel died. Built walls to protect myself." She turned to face him fully. "But walls work both ways. They keep pain out, but they also keep life out. And now," his voice was gentle with understanding, "now I find myself wondering what might happen if I lowered those walls. If I allowed myself to trust again." Her eyes met his in the starlight. "To feel again." Colton took her gloved hands in his. "I would never ask you to forget Samuel or what you shared." "I know." She smiled softly. "That's part of why I trust you. You don't ask me to be someone I'm not. You see me as I am, past and present together." He raised one hand and gently brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "May I call tomorrow?" "Properly?" "Yes," Hannah whispered. "I think I'd like that very much." Spring brought the sale of the boarding house to a respectable family from Denver, the proceeds securing Hannah's financial independence. It also brought increasing closeness between her and Colton, their courtship conducted with deliberate care and growing affection. When wild roses bloomed along the creek in June, Colton took Hannah riding to a ridge overlooking the valley. A small cabin stood in a protected hollow, newly built but already settled into the landscape as if it belonged. "Whose place is this?" Hannah asked as they dismounted. "Mine. Our foreman helped me claim the parcel last fall." Colton's usually steady voice held a note of nervous anticipation. "I've been building whenever I could spare time from ranch duties." Hannah explored the cabin with growing wonder. The solid construction, the carefully crafted furniture, the shelves already lined with books he knew she enjoyed. Through the window, she could see a small corral and the beginnings of a garden plot. "It's not finished," Colton said, watching her reaction closely. "There's still the back porch to build, and I thought maybe a proper kitchen garden if. Hannah prompted, her heart quickening. Colton took both her hands in his. "Hannah Goodwin, I've come to love you more than I thought possible. Not just for your strength or your kindness, but for your willingness to face each day honestly, whether in grief or in hope." He knelt before her, still holding her hands. "I'm asking if you might consider sharing this place with me, building a life together. I know it can't replace what you lost, and I wouldn't want it to. But perhaps we could create something new, something that honors the past while embracing a future together." Hannah looked at the man before her, this quiet, steadfast presence who had never demanded she forget, only invited her to remember differently, who had shown her that vulnerability wasn't weakness but courage of the highest order. "I once declared I'd never love again," she said softly. "I believed grief was the price of love, and the cost was too high to pay twice." Colton nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I've learned that love isn't a payment. It's a gift." Hannah touched his face gently. "And yes, Colton Quinn, I will marry you. Not because I've forgotten my past, but because you've helped me believe in my future." In September, beneath an arch of golden aspen leaves, Hannah and Colton exchanged vows before the gathered ranch hands and townspeople from Silver Creek. Clara Wilkins' children scattered wildflower petals along the path, and Mr. Wilkins himself gave the bride away. That evening, standing on the porch of their cabin as the sun set behind the mountains, Hannah leaned against her husband's shoulder. "I used to think love was like those mountains," she said, gesturing toward the darkening peaks. "Something permanent that would never change, never move." "And now?" Colton asked, his arm warm around her waist. "Now I think it's more like that river in the valley. Always flowing, finding new paths when the old ones are blocked, sometimes calm and sometimes rushing, but always moving forward." She turned in his arms to face him. "Always alive." As the first stars appeared overhead, Hannah Goodwin Quinn kissed her husband with the certainty that while life offered no guarantees, love was always worth the risk. The widow who had once declared she would never love again had found not a replacement for what was lost, but a new chapter entirely her own.